Perfect. All right. So I want to welcome you guys to our wealth building class. It's kind of like an open Q&A-ish type forum where you guys can ask questions of Jake. We're going to go over some things first, and I'm going to walk him through some questions so that he can explain his journey to you guys. And then we're going to open it up to a question and answer, like, how do I do this kind of thing? So with that being said, for those of you who don't know, Jake is our amazing bold coach. And he's going to be doing bold starting next Wednesday for us. So those of you who have not signed up, please do so. It will be worth the $3.99 that you pay for it, that we reimburse you for on your first 2 closings. For, I think, for everybody. Well, if not, I've just made that decision. It is for everybody now. Summer's like, oh. So Jake, tell us a little bit about you. It's cool. Tell us a little bit about you and how long you've been in the real estate business. Jake, we don't hear you. At least I don't.
Helps if I take my mic off. So it's a fun story. I like to say I'm an accidental realtor. In 2008, my father and I started buying investment properties. Through the course of that, had several friends who were interested, ready to do that. I referred them to our agent, and then a few weeks later, I'd get calls back saying, hey, he hasn't called us back. Hey, we don't know what's going on. And that led to me going, okay, what does it take to get licensed? What does this look like? Since somebody else isn't taking care of my buddies, I will. Figured it out. A few months later, I was licensed in Colorado in March, I believe, of 08, 2009. And off to the races. And because I had so many friends that were also interested in doing real estate investment, wrote 8 really ugly offers in my first weekend. Had 2 accepted, which was great, and had a lot of help walking through those processes. And yet, what it allowed me to do is really start off with a jump start. In those first 8 months, closed 38 transactions. In the first full year, we closed 87 transactions. We'd started to build a team. We were off to the races. 4 years later, the team at 7th level, I was able to leave and start to coach bold and do those pieces. That was 2014. Still in existence today. The team still rocks. Does about $1.5 million in GCI every year. We've got a property management company. Today we've got almost, I want to say 55 doors. I know it's over 50 in rental properties. We have, I'm an OP2 Market Centers investor in a third, bold coach, head coach for the bold program, blah, blah, blah. I mean, so there's a lot of things on the resume, which is fun. And yet really the most important piece and kind of my big why behind everything we do is I've got 5 kiddos. My wife and I do. And my wife and I have been married going on 24 years this year. And I've got 2 in college, and everything we were doing was to prepare for the fact that if our kids go to college, we didn't want them to leave with debt. So how did we put these pieces in place to help them get to that point? And that really is kind of my journey in real estate to get to where we're at today. I actually started in 2001 on the mortgage side of the business, and then transitioned into the realtor that I am today.
That's awesome. And I know as a bold coach, you're pretty used to giving your bio, right? So you just went through my first 4 questions in like record time. Good job. So your first year in real estate was pretty powerful. What do you think caused it to be the success that it was?
So we were investing in real estate, and we can get into that story in a minute. And yet my intention, when I left the mortgage business, I was a national vice president of sales for, don't throw any rocks, for Countrywide. And because of that, in their wholesale side of the business, we were compensated really well. So at a young age, I was early 30s, we were doing really well. And yet when we walked away from that, I was on the road 50 weeks a year. And my wife said, hey, we want you home. So we left that, and I started getting into real estate. Well, my intention when we got into real estate was to make enough income in order to pay our bills, pay for a lifestyle, so that every penny we made in real estate investment, we were able to roll over into that next piece of real estate. So that way we could just reinvest our income from real estate into that next property instead of utilizing it to live and to do our thing. So that was really the drive behind how do I do that. The flip side is I built businesses. I built 4 businesses for Countrywide during my time there that were hundreds of millions of dollars in business. So I understood that when I got the Red Book, our lovely millionaire real estate book, I realized all real estate is systems and models. It's the same process. And this just taught me how to build a business at a higher level and how to do it in a way that I could continue to create other opportunities and not lose that core business that I built. And that was the second catalyst to really help me get to the next level. To be the soccer coach that I wanted to be on the weekends, to have the nights and evenings with my family, so that through that leverage and through what the book teaches, it allows us to do that. Now, here's what I will say. That may not be everybody. I mean, your journey may be to be a killer individual agent with a great transaction coordinator and assistant. And honestly, you can make the same amount of money that I make and made as a mega agent. And that's the truth. It really comes down to how do you choose to work your business and what does that do for your lifestyle? So again, you don't have to follow that path. Find what's yours and find that passion so you can get there.
So what got you into investing to begin with? I know that's a pre-real estate question, before you had your license. What made you start? What was the appeal?
Oh boy. If you saw Summer's video yesterday, we were just talking. Basically, when I talk about starting real estate in 2001 and being a mortgage, I left that job and we started our own mortgage company. So it was myself and 2 friends. We started a mortgage company, did really well with it. And then got to a point where my friends were all taking vacations and we weren't, because I was working on stuff. And my wife said, okay, let's pull the numbers and see what's happening. And what we found was I was closing over 100 transactions a year, which was 90% of the closings. And my friends were taking all the vacations. So she didn't quite like that and basically said, you have 2 choices. Either you go do this on your own or I go do this on my own kind of conversation. Well, that was easy. So I walked away from that business. The challenge from walking away from that business is because of the way the circumstances led, I had also financed the majority of that. So I walked out with all that debt. And my wife and I were super transparent about this. So we worked to pay that debt down, to do our, fulfill that responsibility, and got to a point where it was untenable. So I found myself sitting in front of a bankruptcy attorney. And during that conversation, I believed that we had done it right, structured it right. So I just bankruptcy it, BK out the company. And rude awakening hadn't happened. So the bankruptcy attorney said, hey, you're going to need to bring your wife in to protect your assets, your personal assets as well. So if we go this direction, that's what's going to have to happen. And that to me really hit because I love to build businesses. I love to take these risks. I love to do those pieces. I'm not really risk averse. It doesn't matter. We'll figure out a way to make it work. And yet in that case, what I realized is I put my family and our opportunities at risk through this process because I hadn't protected it. So I went, sat in my car, shed a few tears. And about an hour later, after I kind of processed how to have this conversation with my wife, I called her. And I said, hey, Emily, this is what the bankruptcy attorney said. You've got to be a part of this in order for us to make sure that this is taken care of right. And my wife, I'll never forget what Emily said. She said, Jake, I've been next to you and you've always made it work. And I know you'll make it work again. So whatever you need, I'm by your side. And that was when I realized that at the times that we're at our lowest, when you've got the right people around you that lift you up, that see more in you that sometimes you say in yourself, it's a powerful place to be. So I got home that night. And then, at that point we had 3 little ones. She grabs me by the hand and she goes, hey, we need to go for a walk, which is never a good sign when you have 3 kids in the house. Usually that means we're going to have a dialogue that they don't want to hear. So we went out and took a walk, and she says, hey, I don't know if you remember, my dad inherited a bunch of money from my grandma when she passed away. And I called him, and he said he was willing to help us and bail us out so we wouldn't have to declare bankruptcy. All you have to do is call him and let him know how much we need. And she said it just like that. Like, it was super easy. You just have to do this. And I was like, I mean, let's be real. Call your father-in-law and ask for money. That's not the first thing on any of our plates. And yet that was what we did. So I reached out to him. He bailed us out. We didn't have to do the bankruptcy piece. We took it as a note, paid off that note so that it went back to him. And yet it was the same conversation. He's like, look, I know you're good for it. This will come together. And in that moment, what I realized is I never wanted to put my family through that again. I wanted to build a foundation so that as I went out and took these risks and built these companies, they weren't going to be in jeopardy. So we watched the market through the course of the next several years. 2008, we all know what happened in 08, 09. In Denver, we could start buying houses for $50,000 to $60,000. It was crazy. We could rent them out for $850 to $1,000 a month. Our mortgage payments were like $200. So the conversation with my wife at that point was, hey, my dad and I were going to go into this together. I said, hey, if we take a $75,000 HELOC out of the house to go start this process, how do you feel about that? And her response was, you're crazy. Understood. And ever the salesman, by the way, feel free to use a sales pitch. I flipped it and I said, well, what if we took that 75 grand and had somebody else pay our mortgage forever? And she went, that's different. And I said, of course. So that was the goal, was how fast can we get somebody to cover our mortgage through these investment properties? And she says, well, what happens if it doesn't? I said, we'll just sell properties. I mean, it is what it is. We'll pay off the note. Well, long story short, I put 75 grand and my dad put 75 grand, and we started with 150,000. Today, 12 years, 13 years later, that portfolio is worth $12 million. And we have 6 loans. That's it. And the way that progressed was within 8 months, we were able to cover our mortgage payment. So my wife and I sat down and I said, hey, congratulations, here we are in 8 months. I said, what's next? And she said, well, what would it take to cover our basic living expenses? And we've always kept a budget since like 2001. So we took a look and said, okay, what are our basic living expenses? Not lifestyle, not vacations, just the basics. And we came up with that number. And then we put a plan in place. And within 3 years, those basic living expenses were covered. And then it came back to, okay, how do we pay for our lifestyle? Same conversation. And then we realized our lifestyle, our business expenses were covered, our personal expenses were covered, our mortgage was covered, and that all happened within 5 years. And then we sat down with our financial planner and I said, hey, how much do we need to be saving to put our kids through college? And he said about $5,000 to $7,000 a month in whatever they call it, a kid's college fund thing. And then you're good. And I started doing the math and I'm like, well, if I'm going to put $5,000 to $7,000 a month into that, that's $80,000 a year. I can buy another property with $80,000 a year and pay for their school. So instead of investing in the college education funds, we started investing in real estate, rolled that money into real estate. And the thought process was it would pay for kids at school. And once they were done, we still had the asset. And it would pay for my next child's school, And we were able to do that. And so that kind of became the catalyst as we grew into this process. And really the key to that all was we would create our living income through other resources and completely reinvest our profits from our real estate into the next piece of business.
Say the last thing you just said again.
So we figured out what we could do to create the income to cover our expenses and our lifestyle. And that way, what we could do is just continue to reinvest the money we were making from our real estate transactions or our real estate portfolio into the next piece of business. So even with COVID last year, give you an example, we bought a small apartment complex. We bought a vacation rental that we rent out up in Keystone. It's a sweet place that somebody else pays for so we can go play there in the summer. And even that during COVID, we were able to do because we had created that passive income to be able to do that. I was able to sit down with all the businesses that we operate with my wife when COVID hit because of the uncertainty. I mean, I got off a plane on March 12th from coaching Bold. I was ready to get on a plane the next week to go coach Bold in Portland and Minneapolis. And I had 3 sold out bowls. I had prepaid for my plane tickets, my hotel rooms, $15,000 worth of travel that we cover ourselves. By the way, most people don't know that. And then it got canceled the next morning and we got shut down. And I was able to sit down with my wife that next week after Grace said, hey, figure out your budgets, cut 20% out, do it this week. So we sat down, looked at the budget. We were able to cut 20% out. It's like 22%. And the conversation was, hey, if we don't pay ourselves for the next 6 months to make sure that we can keep our employees, because we had over 30 families we were taking care of through our different businesses.
What?
Can we make that work? And we sat down, we put the numbers together based on the passive income we had coming through the different resources and realized we could. Now we had to cut back, don't get me wrong. We cut back substantially to make that happen. And yet the intention was, how do I continue to keep all these great people employed and continue to support their families through this process, even if it meant that I had to give stuff up? Because for me, it was about taking care of my folks more than making sure that we could go take the fancy vacations we wanted to take.
So if you had to talk to somebody that's just starting out on this journey, right? They're selling real estate and they're making, decent income. How do they start? What's step one for them? What's the first thing you tell them to do? Then the second thing you tell them to do?
Mm-hmm. So 100% candidly, I'm just like you. If I've got cash in my bank account, I like to spend it. I like to drive nice cars. We live in a very modest house. However, I like to take great vacations. I don't know about anybody else on the call. And yet when we have a great month, that's usually where we go is, okay, where are we going to take the fancy trip? Can I buy the fancy car I want, et cetera, et cetera. And what I would challenge you to do is look at it differently. And what we did is, and the very first step that I would suggest is go through your budget. Take 3 highlighters, different colors, and literally go back and look at the last 3 months. Anywhere where you spend money, credit cards, bank accounts, you name it, and go through it. If it's something you need, it's your house payment, it's your insurance payment, it's green. You're going to hold on to that expense. If it's something you don't need, mark it a different color, be it pink or green or yellow or whatever. Because there's a lot of stuff on our budget we may not realize. I've got a friend who cancels his credit card at the end of every year, gets a new one delivered so that it forces him to go through it and reassess every automatic bill he has and if he wants to keep it or not. Because there's a ton of stuff we set up automatically we don't even realize. I'll give you an example. When we went through and did this, I realized I had 2 Netflix accounts that I was being charged for. Now, don't get me wrong, it's what, $15 a month, and yet that's $180 a year. And I didn't even realize it because it was on autopay. So as we went through, we found all this other stuff that we were spending money on. I mean, pre-COVID, because of our kids and our family and date nights and all that kind of stuff, we were spending almost $1,000 just in eating out. So a nice thing, COVID helped that because restaurants shut down, so we didn't have to worry about eating out. And got $1,000 out of our budget. So there were all these little pieces that we started to look at going, okay, this is unnecessary, this is unnecessary. The third color is for those things that are questionable, right? Yeah, I might need it, I might not. What we found is it was cable, it was, some of those other pieces. And then the next month you go through and do it again. What's necessary, what's not necessary, or what could I change to save money? And then what am I still not sure about? And as we worked through that process through the course of 3 months, we got to a point where we cut everything out of the budget we could cut. And now the conversation was, how else can we save money? So we refinanced our house at, 3 and whatever percent, stupid low. We went back and reassessed our insurance. I have 3 kids that drive. And for some reason, they think they're real expensive. So they charge me a bunch of insurance. For insurance, I was paying over $800 a month just in insurance. So I called around and come to find out I got with a different company that charges me $425. Had the insurance, which we needed, it was just half the cost, right? So it's these little pieces where you get to look at your life and go, okay, this is what I'm saving. Now here's the challenge is when you cut these savings out, you're used to living with that budget. So take what you're saving, take that $1,500, take that $2,000 and set it aside in a savings account at a different bank that you don't have access to. And the reason why I say that is, like I said, if you're like me and you got cash in your account, we'll find a way to spend it. And what we did with our investment properties is we set up that business account at a separate bank that I had to drive 30 minutes to get to. And if I wanted to pull cash out, I had to get a cashier's check from the bank, drive back to my bank and deposit it. So it made it a pain in the butt. The other thing we did is my dad, who's also a CPA, had the final word on access to the account. And I did it on purpose because who wants to call their dad and ask for money? And because he's my business partner, that's the way we set it up, which really helped me get disciplined about making it challenging to get access to the money so I didn't spend it. And for some of us, that's what we have to do. Today, now it's just a habit. It doesn't matter where the money is. I know we don't touch it. And we just continue to reinvest it. And yet, in the beginning, we had to create that habit. So take the money you're savings and don't just stick it in your regular savings account. Don't stick it with somewhere where you're going to get access to it. Put it aside, make it challenging, make it hard to get to so that when you've saved enough money and you have that opportunity to go buy investment property, you can do so. Number two, if you go to kellerinc.com, KELLERINK.com, what you're going to find at Keller Inc., you can go to the hold book. It's the yellow book. And it has a chart of how to look at real estate and see if it's a good deal or a bad deal. It's really easy. We modified it for our world to make more sense. However, you can go through and take a look at that and it'll help you evaluate property. Here's the other thing. Denver, I don't know about Virginia and Denver, it's got real expensive. I mean, we're getting ready to sell a handful of our multi-units because we bought them for 150. We can sell them for 500 grand today. We bought them 8 years ago and it'll be multiple offers on that same property. So we're going to take that cash, 1031 exchange it in different investments. However, what we found is if we continue to buy in Denver, because you're selling in this market, you're also buying in this market. We started looking around at different markets in the country to figure out what markets fit our investment portfolio and our investment style. So that's where we started going south, 2 hours south to this little town called Pueblo, because the numbers made sense. That's where we started to look at places like Oklahoma City, Tulsa, St. Louis, Kansas City, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and all these other areas where we knew we could find the right property at the right price with the right cash flow that it met the pieces we were looking for. So that's where you start to go outside of your own area just to make sure that you can still get the gains that you're looking for. So those would be my first two steps. Number one, get used to how to evaluate property. Number two, actually, if number one would be doing the budget and getting the money set aside, number two would be evaluating the properties, because then you'll get a chance to see what's really happening. And here's the truth. If you buy a $50,000 property, $60,000 property, which exists in those markets I just said, at 20% down, that's only 12 grand. If you're able to find a way to save 2 grand a month, you have that house, you got that property in 6 months. That property will pay you about $500 a month, which is $6,000 a year. And it doesn't sound like much, except when you take that 6 grand and you add the other $12,000, $24,000 you're saving, and you buy 3 or 4 houses in that year. Now you're making $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And then you do it again and they continue to multiply. You'll get to a point where every month you're buying another property and it just continues to accelerate. And then what does it look like? You know, it starts off slow and it doesn't sound sexy. And yet as it starts to multiply, that's how you get to the point where we're at. And a lot of people, we were talking about this earlier, a lot of people look at where we're at and they go, man, that's cool. Yet what they don't understand was the process and the sacrifices it took to get to this point. And that's the other part of this message I would say is, and write this down, it's simple. What are you willing to sacrifice today so that you can get what you want tomorrow? What are we willing to sacrifice today so we can get what we want tomorrow? And a story about that, my wife Emily and I were really got focused on this. Once we had our basic expenses covered and she got addicted to it like I got addicted to it, we sat down and we'd go through our budget. And we're looking at our budget one month and she goes, you know what? I've been looking. Actually, she says, I've been watching the coupon shows. And I was like, great, here we go. And she goes, I think we can feed our entire family at that point, 5 kids, 2 of us, 7, for $500 a month. So I asked her more questions. She explained how it could happen. We became the coupon hoarders of the world, collecting as many newspapers as we could. And literally for 4 or 5 years, she fed our family on $500 to $700 a month just by using coupons. And here's the thing. Her goal was we take the money we're saving, set it aside so we can continue to reinvest. And that was really the plan. And so that's what we did. Her mom passed away about 10 years ago, and she inherited just over 40 grand. And she says, she calls me up one day and she says, I've got an idea. I'm going to set the $40,000 aside in a bank account so that I can have a housekeeper come once a month to clean, or once a week to clean the house. And I'm going to use that cash to buy that, pay for that housekeeper. And then once the cash is depleted, then we just won't have a housekeeper anymore. Sounds like a great idea. And I said, well, what if we get the housekeeper forever? She says, what do you mean? And I said, well, what if we took the 40 grand, went and bought a duplex for 110, 120,000, you'd still have money left because that's only 22, 24,000 down. And that duplex paid for your housekeeper forever. Because we were renting the duplex out at $1,000 aside. Our mortgage payment was $800. When Dad and I split it, we were each making $600 each, which paid for a housekeeper. Good and bad. That means I've got to pay for a housekeeper forever because that's the deal. The flip side is that duplex is paid off. And now the conversation is how much are we making on it? Well, our rents now are $1,600 aside, paid off. So there's no mortgage, $3,200 aside. Now we're making $1,600 each between my dad and I. And my loving wife, Emily, says, so can I hire a chef? Because this is that process, right? And so the other thing I would say is play the balance sheet game. And all the balance sheet game is okay, what's my net worth? What are my expenses? What are my debts? What are my benefits, right? What assets do I have? Subtract the two, and that'll give you a net worth. When you play the balance sheet game, you're looking at it going, okay, my house is worth X. I've got this kind of mortgage. My car is worth X. I've got this type of car payment. And you're just going through those assets and those liabilities, and you'll find out where that's at. When we started this process, our balance sheet showed that we had a negative 6-figure net worth. Like the only money my wife would have got if I died was from my life insurance policy. So that was where we started. And in less than 10 years, we got to where we're at today by utilizing this discipline. And what happens is as you play the balance sheet game, what you start to do is you go, okay, if I'm going to buy this car, how do I buy an asset that's actually going to pay for this car? So if I've got a $500 car payment, how do I buy an asset, a house or something that's going to cover that $500 car payment passively? And the reason why that's so important is when that car payment's covered, so let's say you got a 5-year loan, when that 5 years is up, that $500 now shows up as income. Because you still have the asset, you're still making that $500 plus, because most likely you're going to increase rents and your car's paid off. So it's just a balance sheet game of if I'm going to create a liability, how do I create an asset that's going to pay for that liability? And that simply comes from Rich Dad Poor Dad. That's one of the things that he preaches, and it's super true. So, excuse me. What other questions do you have? I mean, I can go on and on. It's a passion of mine, and yet I know you all have questions, so let's take some time and answer yours.
I got one question about debt. So in your budget setup, one of the things you said is setting aside the extra in a separate bank account.
Mhm.
So if you have debt, are you putting money towards debt? Are you still putting it away towards assets so that you can pay your debts using your assets?
So there's two ways we look at it. And if you follow Dave Ramsey, he kind of teaches the same thing. And what he'll say is create a slush fund first, right? So get 2 to 6 months, depending on what your comfort level is, in your monthly expenses, not your lifestyle, just your core monthly expenses. Meaning if you got $5,000 a month in expenses, you've got $10,000 to $15,000 set aside in case COVID hits, right? You name it, so that you're covered. Once you get to that point, then you start to pay down that debt. And there's a couple ways to do it, right? He talks about the snowball where you take your lowest debt amount, you pay that off. Once you get that, you roll over that payment into the next lowest, and you just keep doing that till it's gone. And that'll help you accelerate that debt pay down. The other plan is you take your highest interest rate and you pay that one down first. And then you start rolling it over into the next highest, the next highest, the next highest. And the reason why that's so important, and Gary talks about this when he talks about their own way that they lived, they refused to buy a big house and build a big house and do the things that they do and invest in second property until they had paid off their primary home, and they could purchase those additional luxuries cash. And it was about creating the asset base that would pay for those additional luxuries outside of his real estate business. It's the same thing we do. So yes, debt is a hindrance. Debt is also an anchor around your neck. It'll drown you if you hold on to it too long. And yet we also work in an incredible business where if you want to pay off debt, and I'll give you an example. My 17-year-old son plays soccer at a really high level. He's being recruited by multiple colleges right now. He's a junior in high school. And he got an opportunity, he got called by a club in England to go to school and play for this club in England. Well, it's going to cost us about $40,000 to do that. So he and I were having the conversation about, okay, it's $40,000. What does that look like? How do we make that work? And he looks at me and he says, Dad, your average commission is $12,000. And I said, yeah. He goes, do you think you can close one more house a quarter just to make that work? Think about it. If that was what your purpose was, if that was your passion, and you knew your son could go live the life he always dreamed of and play soccer in Europe, would you find a way to close one more house a quarter to make that happen? You better believe it. If you take that same concept and that same discipline and that same commitment towards debt, could you find a way to close one house a month? Could you find a way to close an extra house a quarter that you could apply towards that debt if it really meant that much to be able to clear that out? And I'll share with you a story. One of my agents that I coach here in one of my offices, great agent, does really well, makes 6 figures, and yet they've got 6 figures worth of debt because through the course of them building their business, that kind of happened. And he and I were talking, and I said, let's get really real about this. And this is the process that we went through. And by the way, ask yourself these questions. Question number 1, what's your goal? So he told me his goal. It was to take 17 listings in the next quarter. And I said, great. What's important about the goal? And that's where we got this discussion about paying off this debt and how it would create validity for him and his wife and the family and yada, yada, and help them live the life. And I said, what else is important about it? So I dug a little deeper, and he goes, well, and I said, what happens when you pay off the debt? He goes, well, I want to take my kids to Disney. And I said, so you've got to pay off this debt in order to experience that vacation. And you, in my opinion, you pay for that vacation cash. And he says, yeah. And I said, well, those 17 listings help you do that. 100%. Then I asked him the third question. Scale of 1 to 10. How committed are you to getting these 17 listings? 10 meaning you're going to do whatever it takes. He says, I'm about an 8. So my response was, would you be okay with getting 70 to 80% of those 17 listings? Because if you're only committed to an 8, you're probably only going to get 60 to 80% of it. Let's be real. And he kind of looked at me and I said, so here's the numbers, here's the difference. And we ran the data and I was like, look, if you get 12 listings instead of 17, that's a difference of, in our world, $50,000 to $60,000 in commissions. Plus you're going to get the buyer on the other side of that. So it means you're actually 6 figures less than what you intended to be this quarter. So what happens if you're 6 figures less? He's like, well, my debt's 6 figures, which means I wouldn't be able to pay off that debt. And I said, so how committed are you to pay off the debt? Is it still an 8? And he's like, well, I need to get to a 10. I said, here's the reality. What does the 10 do? It pays off your debt and allows you to do what? And he goes, take my kids to Disney. I said, great. Who's holding? So here's the next question, right? Who's holding you accountable? So you've got, what's your goal? What's the gap? How committed are you? Who's holding you accountable? And he said, well, my wife. And I said, can I be real? And he said, sure. I said, my wife's my worst accountability partner. She's the first one to say, oh, you did your best, when I know I didn't. I said, you know who my best accountability partners were? My kids. I said, do your kids know you want to take them to Disney? He's like, no, we've never told them. I said, great. Here's what you're going to do tonight. You're going to go home and tell your kids you're going to take them to Disney. And I said, here's the reality. To get 17 listings, if you suck at listing appointments, you got to go on 34 to get 17. And he's like, yeah. And I said, and let's be real, over 3 months, let's just round it up to 36. So you got to get 12 a month to hit the goal. 3 a week. He's like, okay. I said, how committed are you 3 a week? 3 appointments a week. Well, and I said, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go home and you're going to get a sticky pad, wherever mine went. And you're going to take this sticky pad, you're going to hand it to your kids, and you're going to have them number 1 to 36 on each note. So every one, they're going to put a 1 and then take it off, put a 2, take it off. And I said, you're going to have them take those sticky notes and you're going to have them put on the front of your refrigerator. And you're going to tell your kids what that means when you get to 36. And he kind of got really quiet. And I said, what's going to happen? He goes, every day I show up and there's sticky notes on my fridge. I know I didn't do my job or I didn't meet the obligation. And I said, what if you gave your kids permission before they even gave you a hug, before you walked in the door, to ask if you did your job today? That's commitment. That's how you get to a 10. And I said, so if you really choose to make this happen, go do it. He took a picture 2 days later of his refrigerator with all 36. Every day I get to see him as he walks in. I'm like, dude, where are you at? Did you get your 3 this month? He's already 2 ahead for next week because of that level of commitment. So the next questions, number 5 and number 6, roll together. Number 5 is this: what could get in the way? What could hinder your progress, right? It seems easy right now because you've done this for 2 weeks and you're a week ahead. And yet at some point, something's going to get in the way. This happens to do with investing. It happens to do with everything. So what could get in the way? And you just identify it and be open to anything that shows up, right? Any of the time traps, any of the money traps, you name it. And then the last question, which is super important, is what's your plan? So what could get in the way, and what's your plan to work through that based on what could get in the way? And when you have a clear plan to break through whatever it is that gets in the way, it makes it easy to move forward. The challenge is when we don't have a plan, we fall back into what's comfortable instead of moving forward in achieving those goals. So 6 simple questions that I asked him, that I ask everybody, especially when it comes to investing, is what are you willing to sacrifice today to get to where you want to go tomorrow? Do you know your number? What is that number? And what's the gap between where you want to be and where you're at today? And you may be starting at the ground level, and that's fine. Take your first step. From there, how committed are you? What's your accountability? What could show up and get in the way? And how are you going to overcome it? And the reality of it is, in our world, I believe your guys' commission level is about the same as ours. If you want to go buy a $50,000 or $60,000 property in Indianapolis, go close an extra deal every month. And then you can go buy one of those every month. You buy 12 of those in a year, you're making $6,000 a month passive income that just shows up. And then you get to go sell real estate and do what you do because you love it, not because you have to. And there's a difference when you get to do this work because you love it versus having to pay my bills. I could stay on a stinking pedestal all day long. However, this is also about you. So tell me, what else? What are your other questions?
I love that awkward silence.
Well, since everybody's quiet, I'm going to ask, what's the soccer club that your son is going to?
So it's I2I, which is outside of Newcastle. So it's a junior club for Newcastle is where it's at. And they've got affiliations with 2 different schools. So he's still looking at that piece. We met with the coaches. We're going to Charlotte in a couple weeks so he can go to a camp with the coaches that are looking at him. He's looking at St. Louis. They're tracking him. Creighton is also on it. So we'll see. He's got some time to decide, which will be interesting. And it's fun to watch him have opportunities. Goes back to the conversation. I was the guy that graduated high school with a really great 2.78 GPA. It was awesome. I got into one school, it was the community college. It was great. So through that process, I learned really easy, and through running the businesses, I learned, I had no idea where doing that kind of volume was going to lead me. I just knew if I did that kind of business, opportunities would show up. And that's what happened. In 2014, I was in a bold class. I was talking to the bold instructor. I was sharing with him, hey, FYI, these are my goals. I set these goals in 2010 in my first bold. And one of them was to have 40 doors. And during that bold, we went under contract on our 42nd door. And I shared with him that goal, and he put his arms on my shoulder. He says, hey, we need people like you to coach bold. I had never had that intention, ever. And seriously, I looked at the coach and I said, dude, I've got a real estate team that's cranking. I mean, my team was in there. They had over 100 houses on the board. I didn't have any because they were doing all the work. I said, I've got a real estate team that's cranking. I've got investment in Market Center. I've got all these properties. I've got a family. Why would I go on the road? And he put his arm around me and says, how about you do this? Go talk to your wife and tell me what she says next week. My wife said, you went to college to be a teacher and realized you couldn't afford to support our family on a teacher's salary. This is your opportunity to go coach and teach and support our family. And she gave me that opportunity. Again, this is a partnership that we're never going to leave. And it opened those doors. So did I answer your question, by the way? Or did I go down the left turn?
That's all good. Yeah, you did.
Who was your bold coach?
That was John Prescott, who was the head coach of Bold for several years, one of my head coaches. And I worked with him for a long time. So great guy. And like I said, you just never know when that opportunity is going to tap on our shoulder. And it's about creating the opportunity through our own effort and through our own work to make that happen. I never in my wildest dreams would have thought that I was going to have to live on that money for 6 months during COVID. I mean, let's be real. None of us thought COVID was going to happen. And then it showed up, and to have that freedom, yes, we had to cut back, and yes, we didn't have the ability to do some of the things we normally do. And yet to have that ability to know I could support those 30 families that work with us and are my team through our different businesses, that to me was the most gratifying part of it.
Jake, let me ask the group. So to be fully transparent and really vulnerable, because this isn't an easy question. What is stopping you today from doing something different than you're used to doing to start on the road that he's on? Like, what really stops you, honestly? And that's for not leadership to answer. That's for our agents to answer.
Well, personally for me, that level of commitment that he outlined with one member of his staff, that is the highest level of accountability I think I ever heard. And yeah, that's an eye opener for me, that level of accountability is what it takes to get to where you want to be and to be debt free. That was going to be my question as well, Jake. That when you were in debt, it sounds like you focused strictly on what you needed to do real estate wise. You didn't look at loans or anything else. You focused what they need on real estate wise to fund your debt. And from getting out of debt, that started you on your path to acquiring wealth and with the real estate Did I
Yeah.
get that right or am I incorrect?
100%. Well, and the thought, the understanding is now we did take on some debt to start this process. And yet when you've got debt and it's hanging over you, we all know this because we've all experienced it. Most of us have. That's the focus, right? I mean, that's the weight. That's what you wake up every morning thinking about is how do I get out of this? How do I create the freedom to be a part of it? And when you really look at it, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got a mortgage and we've got a handful of mortgages on our rental properties, and yet our income on those properties well more than covers the mortgages. The flip side to that, and we're paying those mortgages down, is when you don't have that debt, you're truly free. Like right now, we're accelerating payments on our mortgage for our house because my intention is within 5 years not to have a mortgage. My accountant's like, well, hey, that's a deduction. My response is, I don't care. It's peace of mind. Right? For me, that's just that peace of mind of knowing, and it's having those big goals that allow you to stay focused. So I want to ask this. Down on the bottom, there's a reaction button for those who may not be on camera. If you go down that bottom, click on the reaction button. I'm going to ask for you to raise your hand if you've ever gone through this process. You've thought about this and something held you back, right? Be it knowledge, be it fear, be it an understanding, or even not having a mentor, somebody to push you off the fence. If that's you, raise your hand, because that was me. And here's why I asked that. Is my first real estate property, my first rental property, and I think I've got the picture if you want to see it. However, you can look it up too. It was literally a dump. It was a 2-bed, 1-bath, 720 square foot house with a 1-car detached garage. We bought it for $50,000. The bank paid the closing costs. So my dad and I were $5,000 into it each. And then we had to put $7,000 in repairs. So now I'm in $8,500, right? My dad's in $8,500. It was the scariest $8,500 I'd ever spent. Ever. And I don't know about you all today, I pay $8,500 a year for vacations. Anybody else? Right? You make a good check, you go spend that money on a sweet vacation, off you go. So today it's nothing. However, back then, to put $8,500 into an asset was crazy. And sometimes it just takes somebody to push you off the fence. So as I've had the opportunity to coach other agents in our market centers and other agents throughout the city, they'll bring me their reports, right? They'll run the reports, they'll do it. In my opinion, you do it 50, 60, 100 times to get used to what you're looking at. And I'll never forget it. One of the folks I was coaching, her husband didn't like his job. He wanted to retire. Her goal was to get into real estate and help him retire. And the only way they could do that was buying investment properties. So I sat down with her and her husband. We coached through it. She would send me deal after deal that was great, and they just couldn't get off the fence. So she brought this deal to me one day, and it was a duplex, and it was freaking crazy good. Like 50% return on investment, kind of good. And she brings me in the information. She goes, what do you think? And I said, I think it's the right deal. And she goes, yeah, I'm still kind of worried about it. And this was my response. If you don't write on this deal, I will. So the question is, who's going to be the first one to get their offer? And she looked at me and she said, seriously? And I said, I'm already writing it up, so you better hurry. She went back to her desk. She called me and she says, I'm writing up the deal. And I said, great, I'll hold off on sending mine until you send yours. Truth be told, I didn't write anything. I just wanted her off the fence. She submitted the deal, got it, earned that property. That property today makes them $3,000 a month. And it was the first of several they bought. Her husband was able to retire 2 years later and just manage their properties. Sometimes it just takes somebody to kick you off the fence, right? And that's what it took for me. Even my first deal was my dad to go, okay, this works, go. And we did. And in 2 weeks, we put it on the market, and we had 22 people lined up outside the door to come in and see it and rent it. And we started at $800 a month, and we got $950. They just bid it up. Called my dad and said, holy cow, our mortgage is $220. We just got $950 in rent, which means we're $730 to the positive. So how fast can we do another one and another one and another one? And within 60 days, we had 6 because it just worked. And then it became addictive and life goes on. It's one of my favorite drugs, buying rental properties.
You mentioned, I have a question. You mentioned that once it got too expensive in Denver, you went to other cities and
Right.
to find those deals. How did you go about finding those other cities that in our case wouldn't be Northern Virginia?
Great question. So there's 4 requirements that I have. When we go to another city or another town, number 1, you got to find the right agent. And when I say the right agent, it's an agent who invests and understands the investment market. And the reason why that's important is you come to Denver and you use an agent who doesn't understand investment. By the way, there's still good deals here in Denver. We do about $15 million a year just in investor business. And yet they come into Denver and you're not working with an agent who understands it. That agent will have a tendency to move you into a higher price point with lower returns because that agent will make more commissions on a higher price point. So the key is having an agent who understands what you're looking at, understands your risk tolerance, understands the returns you're looking to receive, and works with you to find those properties. Number 2, access to a great property management company. And when I say great property management company, what I look for is a flat fee company with no additional charges. You may pay more in a flat fee. However, like in Denver, we've got a bunch of 7% property management companies. I own my own and we charge 10% flat. And yet those 7% companies, if they've got to go fix a toilet, they charge you. If they've got to go do a drive-by, they charge you. If they have to go do an interior inspection, they charge you. And before you know it, you're paying 12 to 13% instead of 10 because they charge you for every service and every touch that they do. If they have to collect on late fees, they charge you. So it's, again, understanding what those fees look like. The second part to that is they have access to great contractors that can get in, get the work done quickly and for the right price, because the longer that property stays off the market, the more money you lose. The key with rental properties is to get them turned quickly and get them rented out quickly. The longer they stay off the market, the more money we lose. And then the last piece to that is they have a great lender. And there's 2 types of lenders. There's your conventional Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, go to town, and that can be KW Mortgage or Keller Mortgage for a little bit. And yet what I've learned is you start to expand that asset base. Like we've got 55 doors. I can't go to Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac and get a loan right now because we have so many properties. They don't understand how to put those together and work it. So what we've done is we've set up and created relationships with small banks, local banks that operate commercial real estate commercial real estate division that will lend you private funding at a great rate based on the commercial side. So an example, the place we bought in Keystone as a vacation rental, we paid $115 for it. Now here's the flip side. We make about $30,000 a month right now through the winter, which will pay for all my expenses for the entire year in 4 months. So it works out really well. And yet the bank we used is a bank we have a connection with. And we use them for a lot of our stuff. 20% down, 2 7/8 on a 30-year fixed.
Wow.
Right? And it's because the relationship. Basically what they did is they said, okay, let's take a look at your balance sheet. I didn't even have to prove my income. Let's take a look at your balance sheet. And because the net worth is where it's at, based on how much you have and how much you owe, they said, I know that in the event you get in trouble, I'm going to be able to collect on this thing.
Right.
And that gave them the comfort to be able to do that. So as you grow that portfolio, you're going to have to look for other ways to get the financing and yet understand what those terms are and how to put those pieces together. So that's the 4th piece, especially as you go out of town. What else? That was a great question.
Hi, Jake. I'm Kris Thomas.
Hey, Kris.
Hey, so I've been thinking about investing, and what I'm comfortable with is, sort of like a smaller, like you said, like a smaller, like a lower priced
Mhm.
condo. But what I'm finding is those condo fees, they eat your profit up and they just keep climbing every year.
100%.
Yeah. So, and then I looked into townhouses, but then, it's a little bit more like outside of my comfort level.
Mhm.
So, I'm just wondering if it's worth it to, go where it's going to give me the most returns, even though it's a bigger price point. Does that make sense?
100%. So I'll give you my opinion. As single family started getting more expensive in Denver, what we found was multi-units were still reasonably priced because the investors hadn't moved into that aspect yet. So we started buying duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. And like the first duplexes we bought for 150, 160 grand. Today we're going to list them for $500,000. And yet the reason why we went there, and even today we're still looking at that, is because in the event that one side's vacant, the other side will normally pick up the majority of that mortgage. So as long as you've got one side rented, you've got your bills covered. So that's where we started looking at duplexes, triplex, and fourplex, was because it minimized our risk as long as we had one side covered. Now, the flip side that I would tell you is get to multiples as quickly as possible, especially today with what's happened. A lot of our small investors here in Denver, we're actually listing their portfolios of 6 to 10 properties because most of them are mortgaged. And because the eviction moratoriums happened, and in Denver, the judges are extremely conservative towards that eviction moratorium, it's really hard for us to get people kicked out if they're not making payments. Well, if you've got mortgages and you got tenants that aren't making payments, who's responsible for the mortgage? And there's not a whole lot of mortgage assistance out there right now for landlords. They're helping everybody else. They're forgetting about the middleman. All good for us because we've got so many of our properties paid off. And yet the landlords that are getting hurt are the ones that have leveraged themselves, and the multiples that they do have, they put the wrong tenants in. So what I would say is go get multiples, 5 to 6. Now, if you have 1 or 2 fall short, those multiples are still covering the basis so that it's not coming out of your pocket. It's truly run like a business. And that's the kind of the next step, is to evolve into that process. And really take the first step. I mean, the first step is setting aside the money and starting to do the research. The second step is actually jumping off the fence and writing the offer, and finding the location you want to go to.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yep.
And just remember, once you guys switch from the fourplex over to 5 or 6, you go from residential to commercial. So it'll change your loan terms and who your lender might be and what your interest rates might be. So just be mindful if you find a 5 or 6 one, the terms might be a little different.
Correct. You're looking more at commercial terms
Yeah.
versus as residential.
Mhm.
So let me share with you my favorite part. It's this law called depreciation. With all the properties that we own, last year we told the government that we lost $40,000. And here's how. So there's a law in the tax. So if you look at the tax law as a whole, the first 3 pages tell you how much to pay. The next 85,000 pages tell you how not to pay. So really the majority of that tax law is written to tell you how not to pay taxes. And it's finding a tax advisor, not just a CPA, that understands how to help you with that. So in real estate, what happens is you get to depreciate the value of the asset over 27.5 years if it's a single family home or a multi, which means if I buy a multi-unit for say 500 grand, I'm going to depreciate that at 27.5 years. Somebody else has a calculator, do the math, and yet basically I'm going to write off about $15,000, $20,000 of fictitious losses because the property is losing value or losing its economic life over the course of those 27.5 years. So if you make $7,000 or $8,000 or $12,000 on that property and then you write off 18, you're telling the government you lost 6 grand. You still have that 12,000 bucks. It's in your account. You're just not getting taxed on the 12 grand. And because we all operate in real estate, we actually get to take that loss against the gains in our real estate businesses, which then saves you money on the other end. So when you look at the wealthy, typically the wealthy, and this is the irony to what happens with the tax law, is let's go tax the rich. Well, most of us, know how to utilize the tax law to minimize our taxes. I mean, I typically pay 5 to 7% in taxes. That's it. That's it. And it's because we figured out how to utilize the tax laws to minimize our taxable income so that we minimize those taxes. It's just a little fun trick that we get to play. So that's the other piece. When you look at the investment side, let's say you make 20% cash on cash returns, meaning you put 20 grand into it and you're making 5 grand a year, 4 grand a year. Well, if you take that same principle and you depreciate that by, you know, say 3 grand a year, because it's a $5,000 property, now you're at $8,000, right? And then you take it and you go, okay, the note pay down is about 3%. If it's a $50,000 property, that means that the tenant's paying the note down at $1,500. Now you're at $9,500. Well, if you put $20,000 into it, your total return on investment is almost 50%. Now, here's the other way to think about it. If you're in stocks and you get a 50% return and you want to access that 50% return, you have to sell the stock. With real estate, if you're making 20% cash on cash, which is like a 20% dividend, by the way, where are you going to find a 20% dividend in the stock? You can actually take that dividend, still hold on to the asset while it appreciates. And as rents appreciate, you can charge more. Which means you get this huge dividend without selling the asset. Oh, and by the way, when you do go sell the asset, like what we're doing right now with a handful of properties, we're going to transition about $1.5 million into different properties and different assets, tax-free, through a 1031 exchange. What I like to say is this: I'm going to leave a mess for my kids because we're just going to 1031 exchange forever and never pay taxes. And at some point when I pass, they're going to have to figure it all out. Now, there's this thing called the step-up basis. We can go down that later, and yet there's all sorts of different benefits to that. And yet at the end of the day, I'm going to leave that for them. I think they'll be okay with it. And yet it's that opportunity. So I asked you, you know, at the very beginning, I told you I'd tell you my quick story. I put the bold link in there, and here's why. My story started in 2004. We started the process in 2008. In 2010, I was sitting in that bold class and we did a goal setting activity. By the way, we do it in this next bold. It's this way. It's a format similar to this, where we break you up into teams. We go through that process. And I started setting these goals. And one of the goals was to have those 40 properties. I went home that night. I remember telling my wife, hey, I just set a goal that we're going to have 40 doors in 3 years. She was standing in the kitchen. I'll never forget it. She went silent. And then she finally turned to me and looked. She said, you know what that means? And I said, I know exactly what that means. Are you okay with it? Which meant we're going to cut back. We're going to live simply as long as we can to buy as many properties as we can over the next 3 years. And she says, okay, I'm in, let's go. And that was when she came back to me the next week and said, I think we can live on $500 for groceries. That was how all in she was on this. 3 years later, I'm in bold. And that's where I had the conversation with that bold coach with John that, hey, we're at 42. We're in a contract on our 42nd. Because we had stuck to that goal, because it meant something, because we visualized the outcome through bold, and because bold really connected those dots for me and get me to a 10, 3 years later, we were where we wanted to be, and the unexpected happened, and I got the tap on my shoulder to do what I'm passionate about. That, my friends, is the story. Every single one of us can create that story and live that story in our own way. It starts with making a commitment to grow yourself first. So I put the link in the chat. I'm going to ask you, if this was a benefit to you, if you learned, this is how I coach bold, please take the moment, take the time, click on that link, invest in yourself, take $3.99. And even as Summer said, if you've got to borrow, steal, or whatever, find a way and invest in yourself, because I promise you, it will change your life forever. It did mine. It did Summer's. It put me on a trajectory that I could never, ever have imagined, that allows us to live the life we choose to live today.
I love it. Thank you. Jake, I'm going to actually challenge them one step further. Everybody that knows me knows that numbers inspire me. I dream of them. They dance in my head. And that's not the case for a lot of other people. And I think part of the fear is just the basic number part of it, just to begin with. So I would challenge anybody that takes bold with me. I will walk you through a wealth building plan and a savings plan so that we can get you to house number one within 6 to 12 months. We can set it up with the office where we take a certain percentage out of your check for every closing that you have that will go into a separate account for you for your wealth building. I will be that person that will help you make that dream happen if you choose to join me and Jake for Bold, because I think that you're worth the change and what you can have in front of you. I'm really motivated right now. I took so many notes, holy cow, and I know a lot of this stuff, and I still feel like I learned so much.
Me too.
So I'm gonna push one more challenge out, because we have a goal as leadership. You guys and I have been working together, and that goal is to have 80 folks enrolled in Bold by the end of the week, which is going to take all of us. So first you make the decision, and then go tell this story to others and help them make that decision, because that helps your leadership achieve their goals. And by the way, we're all in this together. So let's work together to help them get there. And then before we wrap up, I love to do this. What are your ahas? What did you take away from this conversation today?
Those that didn't talk. I know me and Summer are like chomping at the bit to say something.
Well, Jake, I love this conversation just because when I got out of college, I did property management for 3 years, and seeing some of the people the landlords that had gotten into real estate, they did it one little deal at a time. And when they did it, it was a really big deal, right? So, seeing the diverse background where they came from, and how, I'm particularly one guy who he was a school teacher, and he realized by the time he was 45, after teaching school for almost 15, 20 years, he was like, I'm never going to be able to retire. Mm-hmm. So he started buying one house, and every weekend he would go through and he would fix it up with his wife and kids. And over the course of the next 20, 30 years, I mean, now he's last time I saw him, he's a guy that can write $1 million check, and it's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. Go get a cashier's check for $1 million, flush it down the toilet, and it doesn't change his life at all. And so I love hearing these stories, because when we get caught up on always raising our expenses to match our income instead of setting that aside and watching it grow into a really life-altering thing, it's really powerful. So I just love hearing your story, and I love hearing people's story around this, because they all had the same doubt. They all thought about it for 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years before they pulled the trigger on the first one. And it's really powerful to hear how that turns out. Yeah.
Well, and it's, what you said is key, because it's, again, what are you willing to sacrifice today, what you want tomorrow? My kids had no idea that we were sacrificing. They always had the food they needed. They always had the ability to do the things they wanted to do. We still took vacations. We just did it different. Like, I'll never forget, 2 years in a row, we drove to San Antonio because we had a timeshare down there that we swapped out. So the timeshare was free. It was already paid for. It cost us gas. So we bought annual passes to SeaWorld and to Six Flags. We went down over Christmas one year. We went down over Thanksgiving the next year, because we timed it so that we could use the annual passes within that year. We didn't have to re-buy the passes. Our kids had no clue that it didn't cost us anything for that trip. All they knew is they were having fun. So what else?
I'm going to share something super personal, because you guys have been getting it the last 2 days of mine as well. So Ty knew all about real estate when we got married, and we bought our very first house in Killeen, Texas, right outside of Fort Hood, for $55,000, which was something that I never expected to do. So I cried at the closing table, and it still makes me, and Ty was like, what the heck is going on? Like, ugly cry because it was something that I didn't expect. I just talked to my big brother about this a couple days ago, who did the same thing. So if you're in that space where this seems really big, right, and it's looking at it as, just like what other people do, and just like Ty said, it's one house at a time, it's one little piece at a time, and it doesn't have to be this big thing, and it doesn't matter where you are in the process. We're here to support you through it, and we've been there, right? All of us started at that point and have been building our life since then. And so I'm incredibly excited and thankful to get to share that with you guys too. So
Awesome. Well, it's been an honor for me. It's been a pleasure. This is, if you haven't told, this is one of my passions. It's also part of the course that we were able to write. I was able to contribute to it. It's phenomenal. And this is the fun we have. I mean, this bowl, this experience that we've created is small, and it's set up this way so that we can have these types of dialogues. So you can break up into your teams and your groups, so you can create that accountability, and you can truly go out and create the life you choose to live and not just accept the life you currently have. So register today. Have a great time. You all have my contact info. If not, Summer and Sheila do. So feel free to reach out to them. If you want to shoot me a text, ask questions, all that kind of stuff, I'm available. I'm here. I'm your coach. So feel free to reach out. Love to connect and have that conversation with you. So please register, grab your friends, help them register. We are here to help you and support you. Have a great day.
thank you, Jake.
Thank you.